And joining us now in studio, Laura Cattari. She is steering committee member of the Hamilton Roundtable on Poverty Reduction and a social assistance recipient. And we welcome you to TVO.
Thank you for having me.
Nice to meet you, Laura. Okay, you're on something called ODSP, yes. Ontario Disability Support Program.
Yes, I am.
Why are you on that?
I'm on it because after 20 years of working, having long-term benefits and relying on my benefits, I was laid off. Unfortunately, at the same time that I was laid off, I became ill and had to seek Ontario disability supports in order to live.
You say you became ill, and I saw you when you walked into the studio. You use a walker.
I do use a walker.
How
come? It's a combination of illnesses, mainly fibromyalgia, which is chronic muscle pain, weakness, fatigue, as well as spinal arthritis throughout most of my body.
Yikes.
Yes.
Doesn't sound pleasant.
It's not pleasant at all.
And has made it really hard for you to get a job?
It has made it hard for me to be consistent in working. I don't know the levels of pain from day to day. And I know as a former manager myself, an employee that isn't consistent is difficult to employ.
And thus you are eligible to receive this social assistance program?
I am.
Okay. How much do you get from them? Can I ask that?
Absolutely.
Okay.
That's why I'm here. I receive $1,030 a month from them.
$1,330 a month.
No, sorry, $1,030 a month.
$1,030 a month.
Yes.
Does that, how far does that go in terms of paying for food, shelter, all of that stuff?
It doesn't go very far. Unfortunately, shelter costs, I live in Hamilton, Ontario, and it's a fairly reasonable city to live in. Shelter costs for a single person, a one bedroom, starts about $700. When you take into account that you have to add hydro to that, which has gone up recently, most people with ODSP also have additional expenses that are not covered under the program. Things like anything like Tylenol, supplements that you need to take as part of your illness, whatnot. It gets difficult. Unfortunately, if I pay for food, then I can't pay for things that, for me, provide social inclusion. And after 9 years, that can...
What does that mean, pay for social inclusion?
Well, for example, to have internet, to have access to cable television, to watch this program, to watch the news, to know what's happening out there, costs money. And unfortunately, if I pay for things like internet, so I can have email to remain connected with people, I'm eating into my food budget to do so.
And is ODSP your only source of income?
Actually, for myself personally, I get CPP disability pension, and that's deducted dollar for dollar from the Ontario Disability Support Program. So I don't get it on top of ODSP. It's actually deducted dollar for dollar from what I receive from ODSP.
Why do they do that?
They believe it's a form of income, and ODSP is a method of last resort in this province. So if you're getting any other income, they will remove that from the full amount that you're entitled to.
Is your ODSP taxable?
It's not taxable, CPP is.
CPP is, okay.
Yes.
All right, we've got the basic understanding now of how you live life. I'm gathering probably at the end of the month there's not a heck of a lot, if anything, left over from your ODSP.
None.
None left over. So you're living hand to mouth is what they say. That's the expression.
Absolutely.
Can't save any money at all.
No savings, and it gets difficult for large purchases like winter coats or boots. So saving for even a trip to Toronto sometimes. Most of my family lives in Toronto or north of Toronto, and even making sure that I save enough to go up and travel to Thornhill can be a challenge some months.
So describe your experience with this system, social assistance.
I think one of the most interesting, or what I find crazy-making things about this system, there are a number of them, but I'll start with food. Because I've chosen to have internet, what happens is I eat about one meal, maybe partially a small snack during the day and a full meal at night. What that does is have my body think that I'm starving, and acid increases. So I get a prescription to reduce my stomach acid. I get extra benefits to deal with periodontal disease that goes with extra acid.
So why don't you just eat more food? Because you can't afford more food.
But I can't afford more food, but they'll pay for all the medical expenses to cover the symptoms of not eating for food, which I find really amazing.
So let's understand this. As somebody who gets disability support payments,
Yes.
you are also eligible for other benefits that go with that, right?
Yes. You get drug benefits, you get basic dental benefits that have to be pre-approved before you get them, and I believe some vision care, but it's very detailed as to when you can get the vision care and how
But if I
often.
understand you, you're saying that because you don't have enough money to actually buy food,
Right.
you suffer adverse health effects because of that,
Absolutely.
which are covered by the government of Ontario.
Absolutely.
So this to you makes
It makes no sense.
sense, okay.
The amount that you're spending on medical care for me, if you gave me $50 more, say, then I'd be eating and I wouldn't be using the system. Plus the medical visits involved as well, so you're paying the doctors to see me.
Okay, you know that right now there's this commission that's been traveling across Ontario. It's come up with a
Yes.
couple of discussion papers.
Yes.
Have you had a chance to read them?
I have.
What do you think? Are they on the right track?
Well, I'm going to preface it by saying I know it is an interim report and it's not the final. I was disappointed. It seems a really huge administrative exercise in fiscal spending reduction. I believe the commission was formed out of the 2008 Poverty Reduction Act here in Ontario, and I was hoping to see a strategy towards poverty reduction in it. I know for myself on ODSP, I'm actually lucky. I receive far more money than people on Ontario Works do, and I know in order to function or to get a job, people need to be healthy, to be thinking straight. And when you're trying to decide between shelter and food and all the anxiety that comes from being insecure housing, insecure food, you don't have the energy, you don't have the wherewithal in order to find a job.
We should just explain that Ontario Works is another social assistance
Yes, it
program.
is.
And the two chief commissioners who are in charge of this whole thing are going to come in right after you're done, and they're going to explain why they're doing what they're doing.
Okay.
They've put forward a number of different options that they're getting people to sort of comment on.
Right.
And one of the ideas is that health benefits that you receive by being on disability support ought to go to all low-income Ontarians, not just those who accept, I guess, what we used to call welfare in the old days. What do you think of that idea?
I advocate anti-poverty straight across the board, not just for people on social assistance. And I think it's horrendous that we do have low-income earners that are not able to afford basic drug care, basic dental, basic vision care. I think it's great. It's a fabulous suggestion. It's much needed. My question, though, would be why are we supplementing employers that are not paying their employees enough to afford these things? Why are we supplementing them for benefits they're not providing for their employees? And is that feasible long-term as well?
Should welfare rates be increased?
I believe so, yes.
Yes?
Yes,
You know we have a $16 billion deficit.
absolutely.
And the people who pay the bills, the first thing they're going to say is, I'm having enough trouble making my own ends meet. How can I go towards, how can I be expected to pay even more in tax in order to allow those who, for perfectly legitimate reasons, can't make ends meet themselves? What's the answer to that?
Well, there are a couple of answers to that. First of all, you are paying anyhow. You are paying enormous healthcare costs, maintaining people in this state of poverty. Like I just said, just food-wise and what I am being medically treated for not eating properly. I'm not the only person like that. They've shown people are 3 times more likely to suffer from chronic illnesses such as heart disease if you live in poverty. So we are paying for it through the healthcare system. For a long-term sustainable solution, creating a healthier population that are able or better able or prepared to work because they're healthy, I find much more reasonable than unhealthy people where you're complaining that they're not going to work and they're not able to maintain work when they get in it because of the shape that they're in.
So I don't know what, maybe a $200 voucher to go to any grocery store in the province, would that make more sense?
That would be fantastic. Currently, shelter costs, I know for myself, I'm given $467 for shelter costs. I had mentioned $700 for rent. Either shelter costs are accommodated better or a food voucher. I wouldn't mind a food voucher to a popular store, and so I'm not spending it on anything else if people are upset about it.
There's always lots of blame to go around, but I'm
Yes.
wondering who's really at fault for the way things are?
Oh, that's a difficult question. I'm not one to point fingers. Actually, the Roundtable for Poverty Reduction that I'm on, it is about collaboration and not pointing fingers. I think, though, we have allowed ourselves to get into a spot where we've created a labor market that makes it difficult for people to find employment that is long-term, that will cover their expenses and meet their basic living needs. And something has to change there, because even once people are trying to get off the system, they're not finding employment that makes it something they can stay off the system with. And we need to look at that.
And just finally, for those who believe that the welfare rates in this province are generous, acceptable, above the national average, you say what?
Absolutely not. Especially welfare rates, OW, Ontario Works rates. With their increase, this past year, a 1% increase, they're at $599 a month. And like I said, a basic apartment in Hamilton is $700. Not only that, fruit and vegetables in the past year have gone up 6 to 13%. So not only are we not paying enough, but we're not raising the rates yearly to anything close to indexing what's happening out there.
Support Ontario's public television. Donate at tvo.org.